Okay, this is a quick example of a complete full stack demonstration, I guess you'd call it, of a browser calling a servlet, which calls a database, which returns information back to a JSP page, which formats it in JSTL, and then returns it back to the browser. So here's what it looks like, quite simple. I have a combo box here, a drop-down box, which has four things in it, 3 countries and chair. Now, on the other side of the stack, I have a database here, and that database contains 3 tables. That's a Boolean flag, so I add these 3 countries appear in my combo box. If I just change one of those to 0 and apply, I'm just going to show you that a change in the database actually will update what happens in my web interface. So it doesn't right now because that's still loaded, but if I load that page again, and now I only have 2 countries and chair. Now I'm going to show you the code behind that quickly, just as a quick demo. Whenever my browser goes to first servlet, which is the name of this web project, followed by /controller, which is the name of that controller servlet, it goes in, and in the doGet method, quite simply, what it does, first of all, it looks for the action parameter on the URL. So I've put an action parameter in the very end. If I type in action equals get available countries, it does this. Okay. I've also put this as the default action, so it'll do it even if I don't have an action. But if I have a different action in there, it's going to give me an error. See that? So I'm going to go back to countries again, which is the same as the default one, which I'll show you in a second. So if I remove that, countries will be the default one as well. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what it actually does. When it goes into the servlet, it gets that parameter that we've just seen from the request. It gets the action, so whatever is after the question mark action equals will be assigned to the variable string action. Then it has a switch statement, and that switch, depending on what the content of that action is, if it's get available countries, it'll do this. And if it's a default one, if it's got nothing, it'll also do the same thing. I've just put that in for convenience now, so I don't have to type it in every time I run this program. Okay, so what does it do? It defines a new variable called countries, which is a list, which is a generalization of array list of country class. And the country class is simply, it's got 3 variables and getters and setters for each one. Strangely, it's got a set for the country and a get for the should have a getter and setter for each of these 3 variables. Okay, these getters and setters, by the way, just generate them straight away in Eclipse. Now it calls a class I have called dbhelper2, and it calls a method called getAvailableCountries, and that method magically passes back a list of countries. Then it puts that list inside the request, and then it forwards the request to this JSP page called countries.jsp. Now we'll get into that in a second. First of all, let's look at the first thing it does. It uses a dbhelper2, which I made, .getAvailableCountries. So let's look at that. There's the look at the getAvailableCountries one. Here it is here. So this is a static function, and it returns that list of countries. What it does is it has a string of SQL, and all that does is select all of the countries where active equals true. Fine. It makes a new array list. It iterates. It does a try catch. It iterates through, gets a connection to the database. It creates a statement out of that SQL, makes a new result set, executes the statement, and then it iterates around in a loop while there's more records in that result set. It makes a new country class, a new instance of that country class. It adds the country ID that it gets from the record set. It adds the country name it gets from the record set, adds it to the array list, and then keeps on going. And then finally, it returns that array list back to where it was called, which is back here. And then it sets that array list, it puts it into the request, and then forwards the request to that JSP. Now, I'll just look quickly at the countries JSP. So countries JSP receives that. Now, the countries.jsp, I have done this in something called JSTL. So you need to add this to the very top of your JSP page, and you also need to add in a jar file into your project, which I'll explain in just a second. So this is the relevant bit of code here. Inside the combo box, all I've done is in JSTL, I've done a small for loop. That's what it looks like, where it just receives countries, which if you remember, that's what I added it in as. I added it in as countries into the request. So it receives countries, iterates around, so for each item in countries, it uses the variable element to refer to it. It adds a href element.country_name, which if you look at the output, that just adds the list, the country name inside that list. Okay? Now, this is a simple example, but it just shows how you can link things together and how you have a web browser which calls a servlet, passing in a parameter. That servlet calls a helper class, a database helper class, which returns the results back from the database. Then it comes back here, and then it forwards that to a JSP page. And inside that JSP page, it uses something, it uses JSTL, which is a simple little language, all made up with tags, which works really well, to format that and add that into your HTML page. Okay, as an alternative to just embedding Java in a JSP page. Now finally, I'm going to show you how in your project you're going to have to add in a couple of things. In your project, of course, you're going to have to add in your your JSTL jar. The JSTL jar file you can find, I've got JSTL 1.2. You can find that in our Google Drive if you haven't downloaded it anywhere else on the internet. It's in our Google Drive in Books and Resources Java Libraries. And first of all, you add it in there by going to the project properties. In a second, project properties. And from there, you can go build, Java build path, and go to libraries, add external jar, select it, and click on OK. I've already done it, obviously. There it is, there's mine. And then you OK that. And then finally, because this means it'll compile, you can see it there in reference libraries, but whenever I deploy an application onto the server, it actually needs to be in here. It needs to be inside my webinf lib folder. So I pick it up from there, I just drag it and drop it in there. I'm not going to do it twice, but I drag it and drop it in there. That means that whenever I compile and package up my application and it gets deployed on Tomcat server, it will actually have that. Otherwise, if I don't do that, if that's not included in there, this JSP page is going to give me an error saying that it hasn't found or it doesn't understand those tags that I've used. Okay, good. I hope that explains the full stack of browser, servlet, database, back to servlet, to the JSP, format inside JSTL, and back to the browser again. Thank you.